Why am I here? What's the point of it all? Why should I care about anything when everything eventually fades into nothing? These aren't just dramatic thoughts we entertain during sleepless nights. They're the same questions that once haunted one of the greatest writers in human history, Leo Tolstoy. A man who had everything that the world tells us should make us happy: fame, wealth, influence, and love. He had written War and Peace, a masterpiece that cemented him as one of the greatest literary minds of all time. He had a devoted wife, children who adored him, and estates that stretched across the Russian countryside. Yet, despite all this, Tolstoy found himself staring into the void. His achievements, once so full of promise, began to feel like illusions, shimmering images that disappeared the moment he tried to grasp them. He would later write that he could no longer see any meaning in life, that he feared he might not survive his own thoughts. So how does a man who has everything end up feeling as if he has nothing? And more importantly, how did he find his way back? That's what this video explores. Not just the despair that consumed Tolstoy, but the profound transformation that followed, a transformation that might help you too rediscover purpose when life feels empty. Tolstoy's early years were marked by restlessness. He was born into privilege, but loss shadowed him early. Both parents gone before he was 10. The chaos of childhood shaped him into a man constantly seeking control, order, and meaning. As a young adult, he lived wildly. He gambled, drank, and chased pleasure as if he were trying to outrun something invisible. Then came the war, the Crimean Campaign, where he witnessed death up close. Yet even there, amidst the blood and the silence of battlefields, he continued writing. And his words, oh, they changed the world. War and Peace and Anna Karenina were not just novels. They were symphonies of the human soul. They gave him everything: admiration, wealth, immortality. But success is a strange thing. It feeds the ego but starves the soul. For years, Tolstoy lived the life of a man celebrated by the world, yet disconnected from himself. He once said, I had everything from which I might have expected happiness, and yet I was not happy. That sentence is a quiet earthquake because it reveals what so many of us eventually discover: that comfort, love, and even recognition cannot fill the void of a restless spirit. The more Tolstoy achieved, the more he felt an unspoken truth rising within him: that no matter how high you climb, the summit offers no guarantee of peace. And then, one day, it all began to unravel. When Tolstoy turned 50, something inside him broke. What had once been a faint whisper of unease became an overwhelming roar. He could no longer ignore the questions that had always lingered at the edges of his mind. What is the point of all this? Why do we live? Why do we die? He found himself unable to sleep, afraid of being alone with his thoughts. Even simple joys, family dinners, the laughter of his children, lost their color. He later confessed that he had to trick himself not to take his own life, so unbearable were the thoughts of meaninglessness. In his confessional writings, he describes lying in bed at night with one haunting image playing in his mind, the image of a rope. And he feared that one day, in a moment of weakness, he might use it. What's striking is that this wasn't the despair of a man who had failed. It was the despair of a man who had succeeded. He had reached the top and found that the top was hollow. He realized that the happiness he had built was built upon sand, that every pleasure, every triumph would eventually fade into death. Nihilism, the belief that life is inherently meaningless, took hold of him like a storm. It's not a belief one chooses. It's an infection of the soul. And once it begins, it consumes everything: joy, love, ambition, even faith. Tolstoy wrote that he felt as if his life were a stupid, evil joke. He couldn't pray, couldn't write, couldn't live without feeling the constant weight of futility pressing on his chest. But somewhere in that darkness, in that unbearable emptiness, a question began to grow. If life truly had no meaning, then why do we still feel this hunger for it? Why do we keep searching? Why does the heart still yearn for purpose when the mind tells us there is none? That question, fragile yet persistent, would become Tolstoy's salvation. It was the faintest spark of faith hidden inside despair. And that spark would soon lead him to a parable that changed everything. In a confession, Tolstoy describes a haunting parable, one that would become the mirror of his soul. He tells the story of a man being chased by a wild beast across an open field. Desperate to survive, the man runs until he spots a dried-up well. Without thinking, he jumps in, only to find that at the bottom, waiting for him, is a massive dragon, its jaws open, ready to devour him. Panicked, the man grabs onto a branch growing from the wall of the well. He hangs there, suspended between two forms of death, the beast above and the dragon below. As he clings to the fragile branch, he notices two mice, one black, one white, gnawing at it from both sides. The branch is his life. The mice are day and night, time slowly consuming the thread that holds him between existence and death. And then, amid this terror, the man sees something unexpected. Drops of honey glistening on the leaves of the branch. He reaches out and tastes them. Sweet, beautiful, momentary honey. For a moment, he forgets the dragon. For a moment, he forgets the beast. Tolstoy saw himself in that man. He realized that his pleasures, his wealth, his books, his fame were the drops of honey. They were the distractions that allowed him to momentarily forget the truth of his mortality. He wrote that he had been licking the honey all his life, enjoying temporary sweetness while pretending not to see the abyss that waited below. This parable wasn't just a story, it was an awakening, because it forced Tolstoy to see what most of us avoid, that our pleasures, no matter how sweet, cannot protect us from the certainty of suffering or death. And yet, there's another side to this parable, a hidden layer. Because while it begins as a story of despair, it also suggests something quietly profound. The man still chooses to taste the honey. Even when surrounded by darkness, he reaches out for sweetness. Even when life offers no guarantees, he chooses to live. Perhaps, Tolstoy thought, meaning is not something we find by escaping the dragon, but something we create in the act of reaching for the honey anyway. A defiance against despair, a quiet form of courage. That realization led him to study how others lived with this same awareness and what paths they chose to walk when confronted by the absurdity of existence. As Tolstoy reflected on humanity's condition, he began to categorize the different ways people respond to the discovery that life might have no inherent meaning. He saw 4 types of responses, each one representing a different stage of consciousness. The first way, ignorance. These are people who simply don't think about life's meaning at all. They wake up, go to work, laugh, eat, sleep, repeat, never questioning the deeper purpose behind it all. Ignorance isn't stupidity, it's protection. For some, it's easier not to ask, because to ask is to risk seeing what you can't unsee. Tolstoy envied them at times. He wrote that these people live as if they were unconscious of death, and in that unawareness they find peace. But for those who see, for those whose minds won't stop asking why, ignorance is impossible. The second way, the path of pleasure. This is the road of indulgence, the pursuit of luxury, comfort, distraction. Tolstoy had lived this life for decades. Parties, literature, romance, status, all of it designed to keep the mind too busy to ask questions. He realized, however, that pleasure is like drinking salt water. The more you consume, the thirstier you become. Each indulgence numbs the pain for a moment, but it never heals the wound. And over time, the pleasure loses its taste. The third way, the path of despair. For those who cannot ignore or distract themselves, there is the temptation to escape entirely, to believe that if life has no meaning, then it is better to end it. Tolstoy himself teetered dangerously close to this path. He described it as the way of the strong, those who cannot tolerate illusion and therefore choose to leave life behind. But he ultimately rejected it, because even if existence is absurd, the act of seeking meaning is an act of life itself. To stop searching is to deny the very spark that makes us human. The fourth way, the path of limbo. These are the people who neither live fully nor die completely. They drift. They know that life is meaningless but cannot find the strength to change it, so they remain suspended in apathy. They are neither ignorant nor indulgent. They are simply numb. Tolstoy saw this as the weakest state of all, not because these people were evil, but because they were paralyzed by awareness without action. They had seen the truth, but did nothing with it. These four paths, he realized, reflected the entire human condition. And in that recognition, a new question emerged. Is there a fifth path? A path that doesn't deny meaninglessness but transforms it. A path that doesn't ignore reason but transcends it. Tolstoy believed there was, and to find it, he turned toward the deepest wells of human knowledge, philosophy and science. If faith could not satisfy his intellect, perhaps intellect could replace faith. That was Tolstoy's next thought. He began reading everything he could, from Socrates to Buddha, from Solomon to Schopenhauer. He searched their words for something that could rescue him from despair. But the more he read, the worse it became. Because every philosophy, when taken to its logical end, seemed to echo the same conclusion: that life's meaning cannot be found within life itself. He studied the Stoics, who taught acceptance of suffering. He admired their discipline, but their calm detachment felt lifeless. He turned to Schopenhauer, who taught that life is suffering and that peace lies in denying the will to live. That too felt like a kind of death. Even Buddhism, with its wisdom and serenity, seemed to him a philosophy of escape rather than fulfillment. Then he looked to science, the new religion of the modern world. Darwin, physics, biology, all pointed to the same reality: that man is an accidental product of nature, a temporary cluster of atoms destined to dissolve. Science, he wrote, gave me knowledge of what is, but no knowledge of what ought to be. And that distinction broke him, because what he needed wasn't more information, it was meaning. Science could tell him how life worked, but not why it mattered. He found himself trapped between two worlds, reason and faith, neither of which seemed to offer the whole truth. But just as his despair reached its peak, something unexpected happened. Tolstoy began to notice something strange. Not in books, but in people. The ordinary, poor, uneducated peasants who worked on his estate. the ones society ignored, seemed to possess something he did not, something unshakable, a quiet peace, a strength, a light. And it was this discovery that would lead Tolstoy toward his final revelation, a fifth path hidden in plain sight. Tolstoy's despair had driven him far from the comforts of the intellectual elite. His titles, his books, his wealth, all of it had begun to feel hollow. So he turned to the people who lived closest to the raw edge of existence, the peasants of rural Russia. He watched them work in the fields under the sun and snow. He saw them lose children to disease, endure hunger, and face death without complaint. And yet, they lived with a serenity that he, with all his education, could not understand. What gave them such strength? They believed deeply, humbly, in something beyond themselves. Their faith wasn't built on theology or philosophy. It wasn't something they argued about. It was something they lived. It was woven into their daily actions, their prayers before meals, their kindness toward strangers, their endurance through suffering. To Tolstoy, this was shocking. He had spent years trying to think his way to meaning, but these people had found it by simply living, by accepting that life's mystery could not be solved by logic, only embraced by the heart. He wrote, "Faith is the strength of life. If a man lives, he believes in something. He began to realize that faith, in its purest form, isn't blind acceptance, it's trust. Not trust in dogma, but in the deeper order of life itself. It's the belief that existence, even in its pain and uncertainty, carries a purpose that reason alone cannot see." This realization humbled him. He saw that while he had been living for his ego, these peasants lived for something larger. Their lives were hard, but they were whole. And for the first time, Tolstoy began to understand the secret hidden beneath suffering. That meaning does not come from avoiding pain, but from giving that pain a reason to exist. But this was only the beginning. Observing faith was one thing, feeling it was another. Tolstoy's rational mind still resisted. He needed a bridge, something that could unite reason and faith, intellect and heart. And that bridge would appear in the form of a profound spiritual rebirth. Tolstoy's transformation didn't happen overnight. He still doubted. He still questioned. But slowly, something began to shift inside him. One morning, as he walked alone across his estate, he looked at the sunrise, the same sight he had seen thousands of times before, yet this time it felt different. He felt the immensity of life itself, the quiet perfection of a world that continued without needing to explain itself. For the first time, he didn't try to analyze it. He simply stood there, feeling the weight of his own existence, and something in him broke open. He realized that life's mystery wasn't meant to be solved. It was meant to be experienced. He saw that the very fact that he was aware, that he could love, suffer, ask, wonder, was itself a miracle. This was the rebirth of faith. Not faith in the church or the institution, but in life itself. Tolstoy began to see that reason could never fully contain reality, because reason operates in boundaries. It dissects, it divides. But faith embraces the infinite. It unites, it connects. He wrote, "Faith is the knowledge of the meaning of human life, in consequence of which man does not destroy himself, but lives." This realization wasn't about returning to old religious dogmas. It was about rediscovering the raw essence behind them, the ancient recognition that to live is to trust the invisible, to act as if existence has meaning, even when we cannot prove it. That simple shift in perspective changed everything. The despair that had once suffocated him began to dissolve. The fear of death that haunted him became less menacing. He saw that death was not the opposite of life. It was a part of it, and in that realization he found peace. Tolstoy didn't become a saint. He still struggled with doubt, anger, guilt. But now those struggles were no longer meaningless. They were part of the human story, a story guided not by certainty but by faith. And with this new understanding, Tolstoy began to change how he lived, not just in thought, but in action. He transformed his lifestyle, his relationships, and his entire worldview. Tolstoy's rebirth was not just spiritual, it was practical, visible in how he lived every day. He simplified his life, abandoned luxuries, and began to work alongside peasants in the fields. He gave away much of his wealth, devoted himself to helping the poor, and wrote books aimed at bringing wisdom to ordinary people rather than intellectual elites. He was no longer seeking happiness through achievement, but through service, through love, through humility. The man who once sought fame now sought truth. The man who once chased pleasure now embraced simplicity. And in that simplicity, he found joy again. But this joy was different, quieter, deeper, more grounded. It wasn't the ecstasy of success or the thrill of pleasure. It was the stillness of being aligned with something larger than himself. Tolstoy described it as a joy that nothing can destroy, not poverty, not death. He realized that the greatest act of rebellion against meaninglessness is to live as if life is sacred, to treat every small act as part of a larger divine order. And that shift made him free. Not free from suffering, but free through suffering. He understood that meaning is not a treasure waiting to be discovered in the world. It's something the human spirit creates through the way it lives, loves, and endures. That's what individuation meant for him. The integration of the rational and the spiritual, the acceptance of both light and shadow. A union between the mind that questions and the soul that trusts. And as he wrote in his later years, the only absolute knowledge attainable by man is that life is meaningless. But man cannot live with that knowledge, so he lives by faith. This was not a rejection of reason. It was its completion. Because to truly know life, one must go beyond knowing. One must be. Tolstoy came to understand that suffering was not the enemy. It was a teacher. For decades, he had tried to avoid it, mask it, or reason it away. And for decades, he had failed to find meaning. Now he realized, suffering itself contains a message. It exposes the illusions we cling to, strips away the distractions, and forces the soul to confront life directly. The peasants had lived this truth all along. Their lives were filled with hardship, yet they endured because they understood intuitively that suffering was part of a larger story. It was a story not written by reason alone, but by love, faith, and persistence. Tolstoy saw that his despair had been a necessary crucible, the fire in which his spirit was purified. The darkness forced him to confront the emptiness of wealth, fame, and intellect alone. It forced him to seek something beyond himself, beyond reason, beyond life's fleeting pleasures. And in that search, he discovered the paradox at the heart of existence. To live fully, one must accept suffering, and in that acceptance find purpose. Suffering, he realized, is a call to engagement, a demand for transformation. It is the raw material of a meaningful life. The question is not how to escape it, but how to respond to it. Tolstoy's life became a testament to this philosophy. Each act of service, each moment of humility, each drop of effort to help others was a response to suffering. his own and that of the world around him. From Tolstoy's journey, we can draw a lesson that transcends time, culture, and circumstance. Meaning is not found in achievement, pleasure, or intellect alone. It is not a formula or a secret hidden in the universe. It is discovered in the way we live, the choices we make, and the faith we cultivate, whether in God, the infinite, or simply in the beauty of existence itself. Tolstoy teaches us that life is fragile, fleeting, and often incomprehensible. Yet in our hands lies the power to respond. We can cling to illusion, distract ourselves with pleasure, succumb to despair, or drift in limbo. Or we can embrace life fully, with all its suffering and mystery, and create meaning through love, service, and trust. This lesson is timeless because it does not depend on circumstance. Even in wealth, even in poverty, even in the face of death, the human spirit can find purpose. It is a lesson as urgent today as it was in Tolstoy's Russia, and as relevant for us in our modern world of distraction, uncertainty, and noise. So what does Tolstoy's journey mean for you? Take a moment to reflect. What is your honey? What small pleasures distract you from the dragon below? Are you living in limbo, numb to the wonder and mystery of life? Or are you reaching towards something greater in your relationships, your work, your inner life? Tolstoy's revelation was simple, yet profound. Life without faith, faith in the infinite, in love, in meaning, is empty. But with faith, even suffering becomes sacred. The call to action is not to blindly follow his path. It is to find your own bridge between reason and belief, to live intentionally, to create meaning through the way you love, serve, and endure, to recognize that happiness is not a destination, but a byproduct of a life lived with purpose. If this video resonated with you, pause for a moment and ask yourself, what small step can I take today toward creating meaning in my life? Leave your thoughts in the comments. How do you confront the dragon in your own life? And if you found value in Tolstoy's journey, make sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss a philosophical exploration that can change the way you see the world. Because in the end, the question remains, why are we here? Tolstoy's answer was not a solution written in a book or a formula in a philosophy text. It was a lived truth. We are here to seek, to love, to endure, and in doing so, to create meaning that no darkness can ever take from us.